And so Clement gave in again, basically. This is what happened. Philip had a couple of serious hold on Clement. He was basically threatening to have a trial of the French bishops to try Boniface VIII, whom he had kidnapped. He said he had proof that Boniface had been a heretic and had been all these other things that he had accused him of, and they were going to have a trial by the French bishops in order to name Boniface VIII as a heretic more than the Pope. And this really scared Clement. He was not able to withstand that. With all the public opinion against him, he was weak, and he finally gave in. So when he gave in, the Templars, of course, tried to organize their own defense, but Philip was able to intimidate the papal court into condemning their defendants as relapsed heretics. In the inquisitorial procedure, if somebody confesses and then to be a heretic, and then he recants, and then he's considered, and then he becomes a heretic again, then he's basically a relapsed heretic, and the punishment is always death. So Philip had 54 Templars burned at the stake on May the 12th, 1310. So less than a year after he started his proceedings, he had them taken out and burned at the stake. In 1312, 2 years later, Clement dissolved the order, not only in France, but throughout Europe. He did not condemn the Templars as heretics, but he said that the accusations against them were so bad and so widespread that it was better just to dissolve the order rather than let it continue. Also, they were very closely linked to the papacy, so he thought it would be better to put an end to it in order to dissolve it as quickly as possible. It was reflecting on him, all of these charges, because they were very much linked to the papacy. Now, once they were dissolved, Philip ordered the Grand Master, the order's Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, he had him burned at the stake as well, and he went to the stake declaring his innocence. So right up to the moment of his death. Now, of course, when Clement had a final victory over Philip, he ordered that all the Templars' property be given to that rival order, the Hospitallers. So Philip did not get his hand on all the money, but what he did do was to present an enormous bill for all of his expenses in prosecuting the Templars, and that was paid. So he got some of the wealth of the Templars. In the other countries, and most of the other countries, their land and their wealth went to other religious orders, not to the crown. So even though many of the Templars confessed under torture, their testimony is so contradictory that it's obvious that the confessions were forced and they were essentially untrue. A few Templars did admit to sodomy. Perhaps some of them were engaged in that, a few, certainly not many, but it wasn't institutionalized, of course. There may have been some people with that problem there, and that's fine, it happened. But most of them, apart from a very few, nobody admitted to that. The other accusations that they denied Christ, that they had a sort of a homoerotic ritual for entrance into the Templars, that they profaned crucifixes and holy images, that they removed the words of the consecrations from the Mass, that the lay members were absolving other Templars from their sins, they worshipped an idol, they conducted secret meetings, nothing. Apart from the forced confessions, there's not a single proof of any of this at all. It was all basically trumped up charges. It's true that they were probably guilty. Some of them were guilty probably of greed and avarice, of pride, of laxity, perhaps in failure to defend the Holy Land as well as they could have, probably. But that wasn't enough for Philip. That would not have given him enough to dissolve. That would have ended up in a reform of some sort. So he needed more charges than that. So that's why he brought up these other trumped up charges. Now, even though historians have shown, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that these charges are fabricated, the belief that the Templars were adherents of the occult, that they were somehow heretics or sodomites, it's lasted to this day. And it's very popular. People still go on to these things. There's too many fantastic accusations to set out. I'm going to look at two of them briefly. I think one of them having to do with the occult, the other having to do with Freemasonry. They were soon forgotten, by the way. For 200 years, there's not a word about this. After they were dissolved, there's not a word about the Templars. It's just quiet. It's only 200 years later, in 1531, that somebody brings up the question of the Templars again, and it begins to spark interest in occultist movements in Europe. Those movements were fascinated by a growing interest in Neoplatonic philosophy, the wisdom of ancient Egypt, alchemy, astrology, the Jewish Kabbalah, different kinds of occultism, just to name a few. This began to circulating in Europe at that time. In the Renaissance, some writers revived the Templar story, adding things like pagan sex orgies, the worship of a demonic idol, the sacrifice of infants to obtain magical potions from their ashes after they were burned, etc., etc. What about the Masons? Well, the Freemasons, they most likely began around the year 1600 in Scotland, when the guilds of stonemasons began to enroll outsiders into a brotherhood that demanded strict secrecy on entry and to protect the secrets of the trade. In 1715, the Scottish Freemasons had to flee to France because they had failed in a rebellion against the British rule, and so they brought Freemasonry with them to the French nobility, and it caught on there very quickly. So they, in order to attract members to their organization, they invented a great history to the Freemasons, claiming that it was a brotherhood of knights and stonemasons that went to Jerusalem during the Crusade, that they are the last remnants of true chivalry in Europe, and that sort of thing. And once the Scottish Freemasons had begun to get French nobility into the lodge, based on their sort of infatuation with the crusading ideal and chivalry and all, further myths were added to the Freemasons' identity. So they were supposed to be the sole possessors of the ancient wisdom of Egypt and the Greeks, that the Masonic crusaders had discovered in the Holy Land and then brought to Scotland. Then it was said that the Freemasons were the descendants of Hiram, who was the one who built the Temple of Solomon. And they claimed that he was murdered by Solomon's advisors for refusing to disclose the ancient secrets of Freemasonry. And since the Templars' original headquarters resided on the Temple Mount, as it was called, the Templars became a convenient identity for Masonic conspiracy theorists. So that's where that's where the link was made. They struck on the Templars because they had held that place, and so they had discovered all these secrets themselves, or they'd been passed on to them. And so it was the Templars, because of the place where they had been given in Jerusalem to reside. That's what made the link between the Freemasons and the Templars. So conspiracy theories had the Templars and Masons behind all the great political conspiracies of European history. And the French Revolution being only the most recent, their desire to avenge the murder of Jacques de Molay and control the future of Europe. So there's a legend that when the King Louis XVI, when he was guillotined, one person standing there said, "Oh, you're finally avenged, Jacques de Molay." You know, that's finally the Freemasons have gotten back at the French monarchy after all these years. So there's obviously no connection at all between Freemasonry and the Templars, except the one that was invented from the 17th century on. So the majority of Masonic lodges in France and Germany, they began to incorporate aspects of the occult within their teachings. And as that began to penetrate the Masonic lodges, so did a revised version of the Templar Knights also began to appear. They claim the Templars were the successors of the Essenes now. That becomes these monks that existed at the time of Jesus in the Holy Land. They were said to possess an ancient form of learning that included magical traditions of Egypt and Gnostic teachings, and they had remained somehow in the Holy Land until the Crusaders had arrived, and they had passed on this wisdom to the Templars. And so the Templars are the sole guardians of this ancient magic and treasure. Some escaped to Scotland and then to Germany, and for this there's also zero evidence, right, of course. So all these different movements, they tried to make the Templars into their forefathers without any evidence at all. But it's a very common, we still see it. If you read Watch National Treasure or read the Da Vinci Code or other art novels and movies of that type, you'll find it there. Because it's something, people love a conspiracy theory. You know, people really love there's more to this than you know, and people out there don't want you to know. I mean, people love that. That's what made the Da Vinci Code such a popular book.
Yeah.
So just in summary, the Templars were formed to protect the pilgrims, to defend the Holy Land. Over time, they fell into moral laxity, They became wealthy, they lost their spirit of poverty, and their great wealth and their independence from the King of France led him to attack them, and he was successful. And then in the centuries following that, following their suppression, a lot of pseudo-histories began to be written, to emerge. They presented false versions of the Templars' history, but they lack any serious or scholarly justification.